I'd like to call to order the October 12th, 2021 Planning and Zoning meeting. Courtney, could we do roll call, please?
Miss Ulrich,
Here.
Sarah Ritchie. Here. Al Ferris.
Here.
Aaron Freeberg. Bob Ormsby.
Here.
Jeremy Preble. Josh Rabe.
All right. Next on the agenda is the agenda approval. Does anyone have any questions or we call for a motion?
Move approval. I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next is minutes approval from the September 14th, 2021 meeting. Do we have any questions or comments, or would someone like to call a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes from the 9/14/2021 meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, next on the agenda is public comment. And this would be if there were any comments that do not pertain to an agenda item. Do we have any comments that don't pertain to an agenda item from the public? I don't believe so. There's no old business. So number 7, new business is item A. Consider recommendation on request for approval of a plat of survey for Robert and Elizabeth Freese located at 603 East Hillcrest Avenue. Charlie?
Yeah, the applicant currently owns just a little over 50 acres of ground along Hillcrest on the south side. They're just south of Summercrest Hills, the development with the Y in it there. It's located at 501 and 603 East Hillcrest. Property owner currently has this ground on the market. They are hopeful to divide the single family dwelling off that is located at 603 East Hillcrest from the balance of the farm ground. The hope there is that they can sell the farmstead, the old farmstead, separately from the farm ground that will eventually be developed if sold. The single family dwelling would be placed on acreage that's approximately 2.5 acres in size. With what's proposed, all aspects of chapter 170 would continue to be met. However, zoning requires that the A1 zoning district have a minimum lot size of 15 acres for a single family dwelling. With that, on September 1st of 2021, the applicant did receive a variance from the Board of Adjustment to allow for a division of ground at that location on approximately 2 acres. So the Board of Adjustment has granted a variance, that minimum lot size requirement of 15 acres. With that, the comp plan does call for the area as regional mixed use. We did mail letters to surrounding property owners within 200 feet of this request on October 1st. So if there are any questions of me, I'd be happy to take them at this time.
If this were done, would this property then become R1
So when
since it no longer would be agricultural?
Yep, so they were not asking for a rezoning of this property. What the agreement we had with that was when this comes forward, and there is a total development plan that is looked at for the balance of farm ground on any rezoning application. Since everything out there is A1, this piece would be included in that, and that was actually a condition on the variance.
Just not to be argumentative, but tell me why it wouldn't become R1 now when because it is no longer agricultural use. Why wouldn't it just become R1?
Because the property owner has to request the rezoning and go through that process.
Even if they change the use of the property?
Yeah, so
So
assessment.
you could build houses on the rest of that and still call it R1? I mean, Ag 1, A1?
You could, well, right now, without variances for that, again, you can do 15-acre lot sizes all around that piece right there. What we would have, though, is, again, you have something with the comp plan, is the comp plan doesn't call for those size of acreages out there. So we could essentially deny a subdivision plat because it did not meet the comp plan.
Okay,
So,
it'll eventually become
Yep,
residential.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll make a motion to move forward with alternate 1, approving the plat survey requested as submitted.
Second.
Any further discussion before we vote?
And really quick, I just want to make sure, what item were you here for?
See,
Okay, just want to make sure before we get there.
thank you, Charlie. All right, could we do a roll call vote? Courtney?
Bob Ormsby,
Yes.
Misty Solowich,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Al Ferris.
Yes.
So moved. Item B. In new business, consider request from JK Management LLC for a right-of-way vacation and conveyance of the portion of the north-south alley that lies west of lots 15 and 16 of the plat of Jones and Wendell addition to Indianola, Warren County, Iowa. Charlie?
Yeah, the alley proposed to be vacated is a currently improved alley that currently sits between ground that is owned by 3 different people. JK Management does own the ground that would be on the east side, and the Ryan Holtz and the Nordhagen Revocable Trust own ground on the west side. All parties have agreed to this vacation. As all the landowners have agreed to the vacation, as far as the city is concerned, the alley proposed to be vacated is no longer needed for the use of public, and its maintenance at the public's expense is no longer justified. So did want to note that the applicant does intend to issue access easements to adjoining property owners. There are currently public utilities located in this alley, and you'll see attached to this that we've included a draft public utility easement to be included on this. And with that, staff would recommend approval with the condition that that public utility easement be granted to the city prior to the vacation being executed. So with that, would be happy to answer any questions.
It says that they want conveyed to them the alley that lies west of lots 15 and 16. So who's going to end up with the
It would be,
title?
yeah, with what happens there is you take, since all the property owners are agreeing to it, you essentially break it into fourths almost, and each adjoining property owner gets their
Okay.
fair share of
So
the
it'll go
alley.
down the middle of it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It threw me
But-
when it said west of those lots.
Yeah, so the subdivision in itself, there's, the way that subdivision was laid out is the alley is actually on the western edge of that subdivision. And then when you
okay.
go over to the next east over, that's a new subdivision.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah, a little bit different than how they normally are, because that's typically, you know, it's splitting a subdivision or somewhere in a block, but this one's on that western edge.
With our small group tonight, there's so many opportunities for everyone to call a motion or second it. Would anyone like to?
Oh, yes, I'd like to move alternative to approving the right-of-way vacation request with the condition that a public utility easement be granted to the city prior to the vacation being executed.
I second the motion.
Courtney?
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Al Ferris,
Yes.
Misty Solowich,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby.
Yes.
Item 7C, consider request from Diligent Development to rezone property located at 1909 South K Street from A1 Agricultural Open Space Zoning District to R1 Single Family Residential Detached Zoning District. Charlie?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I just want to note, since we have adopted new zoning regulations for the city, this is actually the first rezoning request that is following the new process that was adopted. So you'll see kind of in the body of the staff report there, we've got that new code. Did want to point out that section B of that refers to the city council referral. That's something that the city hasn't done in the past, but pretty much normal practice, I think, when it comes to rezoning. So what that does essentially is applicant applies to the city for rezoning, community development department forwards that to the city council, who then forwards it to the planning and zoning commission for a recommendation, then it comes back to city council. So new process there, and I kind of outlined that just briefly in that first paragraph. I wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that. So the city council has referred this to the planning and zoning commission for its recommendation. The proposed rezoning, it's being requested to facilitate a future residential development of this property. We have seen a few concepts of this, and they're very high level concepts at this time, and staff's given some feedback on those concepts. But for the most part, if you look on this on a map, you'll see that there's floodplain that really encompasses most of the south end of this property, where the property owner here is just looking at developing the north side or the north end of that parcel, and then keeping the floodplain still in agricultural crop production ground. Excuse me. Gave some details, I guess, on what they were showing on that. But as we go through here, I think there's going to be ultimately some changes that come with this subdivision plat before it is actually forwarded on for review. Currently, South End Court is stubbed in on the south end of the existing Deer Creek subdivision, and that would then connect into this subdivision. The comprehensive plan also does call for a minor arterial road that would essentially connect where 17th, which is a gravel east-west road, connect to that point where that intersects with South K Street, and then go all the way over to R63 highway and just kind of create another road that connects that south end over there. So the developer is currently looking at including that that road connection in there, and then developing around that. And we have not seen a new concept on that yet. So comp plan does call for this area as low density residential. Low density residential does call for 2 to 5 dwelling units per gross acre, includes single family detached dwellings and accessory dwelling units. Currently, there is an 8-inch PVC sanitary sewer main that's just north of this property, and there's an older 12-inch to 15-inch, depending on where you're at in that area, clay main that traverses through this property along the east side of the drainage way. Our WPC department did note that there are plans to upgrade the sizing of that 12 to 15-inch sanitary sewer main, which would then in turn provide a greater capacity to assist with this development, as well as provide better capacity to the north as well. There is an 8-inch PVC water main that is stubbed into South End Court, as well as a 20-inch main along South K Street adjacent to this property, both of which can service for water. Kind of a high level summary of that, but staff did place a notification sign on this property on September 30th, and notification letters were mailed out to surrounding property owners on October 1st. We always note, as with any rezoning, if the rezoning is approved, any proposed development would still be subject to the subdivision requirements of the city of Indianola, which does get reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So with that, if there are any questions on the rezoning, I'd be happy to answer them.
Does the visitor have any specific comments or questions that you'd like to present?
I'm the executor of the estate that has a sale pending with Elegant Development. Just for curiosity and information.
Sounds great. Thank you.
I don't see any issues with it. I guess I'll make a recommendation. Give the city wanted number one. So the city plan on start over. Make a motion that we approve the request for rezoning as approved and as submitted.
Second.
Courtney, a roll call vote?
Al Ferris,
Yes.
Sarah Ritchie,
Yes.
Bob Ormsby,
Yes.
Missy Soldish.
Yes. All right. Item D, discussion and direction on regarding proposed residential rental housing ordinance and program.
Try not to get too long-winded on this because there's a lot of information, and I think we've done a pretty good job of summarizing everything in the memo that Emily has put together. But first and foremost, I think the commission's aware of this, but Iowa Code 364.17 does require when a city reaches a population of 15,000 that they are required to adopt a residential rental code, which would include for regular rental inspections, inspections upon complaints, and then certification of inspected rental housing. So With that, we've been aware with the 2020 census for quite some time that we were going to be over the 15,000 population. The numbers that we were given put the city of Indianola, I believe, at 15,883. So we are over that 15,000, and by code, we have 6 months to adopt an ordinance. Thankfully, we were given direction from council back in March to start this process, knowing that we were going to be over the 15,000. So we're a little bit ahead of that curve, and we're going to hopefully be in well before that 6-month deadline that we're required. Our intention with the code that we've attached here is to have that reviewed by council and in effect by January 1st of 2023. With that, we're also knowing that we have about 2,100 rental units within the city that we are going to have to track somehow, and not wanting to do that in Excel like we currently do with building permits and code enforcement. We are also working with a vendor to provide software that we'll be able to use to register all these rental units. We're focusing on the rental side right now. Eventually we'll get the building permits and code enforcement and having a whole online portal for all that stuff. But just wanted to make sure the commission was aware to kind of help with staff time. We are getting that program in place. So with that, and if there's any questions, either I or Emily can help with this. Emily's done a lot of the legwork on this, so I want to make sure that I give her credit on it. But just kind of started in reviewing what a lot of other cities across Iowa do, and those cities that we looked at are included in your memo. I'm not going to read them just because the list is pretty long. Also sent a survey out to a lot of these communities just to kind of get an understanding of how they take care of things, how many inspections they have, how many rental units they have. We've done a few things to kind of look at their fees and stuff like that, and really engage with some of our other cities just to get a good understanding of what we're looking at doing. So one of the big things that we looked at with the rental code was, okay, what types of units are we going to be accepting from this ordinance, meaning that we are not going to be looking at them. There's some things that state code is pretty upfront about that says you can't look at some of those being transient shelters and groups homes that are currently under state licensing. Because of that, they are inspected by the state. Dormitories, which are subject to the state fire marshal inspection. So any of the Simpson College dorms, those are annually inspected already. So we know that those are, and then state code is also pretty clear on hotels, motels, extended stays, stuff like that. There was legislation that was passed a few years ago, if not even less than that, that is even more specific to your short-term rentals, so your Airbnbs, VRBOs, and stuff like that, that says that they cannot be considered rental units and not subject to these regulations. So as we've looked through this, again, we've put together an ordinance that we think best fits the city on kind of what we're going to be doing. The plan is to do inspections every 2 years. So essentially that, like I said, we have about 2,000, a little over 2,000 rental units. We'd be looking at inspecting about 1,000 per year. We're going to try to split those as well as we can between 2 years and really get that on our implementation. Would call for regular rental inspections every 2 years. As I mentioned, we were going to have to set up a process to where we take in complaints as well and do inspections as part of that process. We would then issue a rental certificate once they've passed their inspection and paid all of their fees. And then we've also looked at a housing code. So state code does specify that you have to adopt one of those housing codes that we've put in there. However, when we've gotten a legal opinion on this, we can also adopt another housing code, which has provisions that are more stringent than the ones that state code requires. Most cities actually use their adopted International Property Maintenance Code, which the city has adopted the 2018 version of. And you'll see in the draft ordinance that we have in there that we're actually making a few amendments to that. We're not necessarily taking anything out, but we're adding quite a few elements to that property maintenance code just to make sure that, you know, we're making sure that these units are safe. And we didn't just pull a lot of that stuff out of midair. Again, when we looked at what the other cities were doing, we really kind of looked at what their ordinances say, what they're inspecting, and just kind of talked about it internally to see where those fit. So just a few other things that we're looking at. Again, you know, some of the things that we have to look at is making sure that tenants are given proper notice about inspections. making sure that there is actually somebody present when we do the inspections. We can't just go into a unit by ourselves. We're going to have the landlord there or tenant there to walk us through there. No minors, that was one thing that we put in there. And then on the certificates, again, just making sure that we cover all of that process on there. So I want to kind of jump down to, we've had multiple community meetings now on this. When we started out, we actually set up 2 community meetings, one just for tenants and one just for landlords. Our hope there was we wanted to kind of separate the two so each felt comfortable speaking to us when we were looking at this code. At the tenant meeting, we had 4 or 5 people there, was it total? And when we got the landlord meeting, we had 55 there. So as I told the Board of Adjustment, I'll tell you guys, obviously, this is a little bit more important, I think, to the landlords as they see it, because it's really going to affect the landlords more than it affects the tenants. But at the landlord meeting, when we initially met with them on August 12th, we didn't really have the ordinance quite finalized, and we did not have an inspection checklist finalized. So they asked for in a second meeting, once we had those 2 finalized, and we held that with them on September 30th. So the draft ordinance that they looked at and reviewed at that meeting, plus the draft inspection checklist that we had, were both included in your packet. There's 2 things that really came out of that second landlord meeting. First was the code that we had in there that required that radon be mitigated if it came over the level of 4, and I'm not sure what that measurement is, but over 4.
PCL.
PCL, yeah. So as I say, you might know that a little better than I do. But I want to be specific on that too. We are not saying with that code section that you have to have the units tested. What that's saying is if there is a test that is done and it comes over 4, then city code would require that the radon be mitigated. Obviously, there's some concern from landlords there. There's cost concerns with that. I mean, I think a radon mitigation system on average is probably over $1,000. Misty, you probably know that better than I do, but they can be pretty expensive. I'll get to the Board of Adjustment and what they said on that too, but then there's also concerns with radon is, there's a lot of inconsistent data on what radon is, what the effects of radon are, and all of that stuff. And I don't necessarily want to get into that here this evening. I don't think we need to, but again, those were just some of the concerns we had. The other concern that came out of that was we have a code section that says between tenancies. So if one tenant leaves and another tenant comes in, the landlord is required to change out all the locks on there. The landlords had an issue with that because their thought was, one of the comments we actually got was, well, we've never had an issue with any old tenant coming in and opening the doors on the building because they still had keys left over. My thought would be, and as we've talked with PD on this, PD did confirm that they couldn't think of any situation where that's happened, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen at some point either. So, that was some of our thought in putting it in there. It's just a general safety thing. I know I bought a few houses in my life and typically we'll always get the locks changed out right away, just because for me, that's a safety thing. But we just figured making that a requirement was good. But again, the landlords had some concern with that because that's an increased cost, increased maintenance that they have to do. One of the things we did say that we were okay with, and I think that's written in the code as well, is on like a multifamily units. They can essentially switch the locks around amongst the units, so they don't have to change the locks necessarily. They could move those around. But again, the landlords did have some concern with that. We did present this to the Board of Adjustment at their meeting last week. Main reason for the Board of Adjustment's review on it was because they're actually going to serve as the appeal board for any concerns or any variances that come along with that. But we did present those 2 issues the landlords had with them. First, on the locks, the Board of Adjustment did propose to modify language that would essentially state, following each change in tenancy and at the request of the tenant, locking devices on the dwelling unit entry doors shall be changed or rotated. So what that would mean is, again, they're not required to do it, but if the tenant requests them to do it, then they have to do it. And I think the Board of Adjustment thought that that was a good compromise. On the radon, their suggestion was, okay, let's put some language in there that says essentially that the tenant's able to break their lease if the landlord does not wish to mitigate the radon. I didn't think it would be legal, but we did confirm with legal that the city cannot force the lease to be broken. There's actually sections of Iowa code that deal with that, but the city cannot put that in an ordinance that says the tenant can break a lease if they don't have radon mitigated. So with that, I think what we're really looking for from the Planning and Zoning Commission, this isn't a zoning thing, so you're not required to give a recommendation, but I think the city council's always honored and respected your recommendations on things. So we wanted to make sure to get it in front of you, but really, I think we're just looking for just some general concurrence that, hey, we're heading in the right direction. I like what you're looking at as far as inspections, whatever that may be. But the two concerns that the landlords came up with at that meeting and what the Board of Adjustment discussed, we kind of like some direction from that. I think on the locking devices, I think we found a good alternative that kind of works for both the city and the landlords on that. If the commission disagrees, let me know. But I think on the radon, I think we want to have a little bit of discussion on that is, do you think that's worthwhile to have in the ordinance, or is that something that maybe we should just consider taking out and not having in the ordinance? And then really anything else you have on the ordinance, any questions you have, any feedback that you have, same thing with the inspection checklist on that as well too. So I guess we'll just open it up for discussion. And I guess first of all, look at you. Is there anything else I missed that we should have added?
I guess another thing you'll see in the agenda packet is there's full survey results. I'll just briefly talk about that. But these were comments that we collected from the rental housing community, so tenants and landlords, and also community members, the general public, about not necessarily the code, but the conditions within the rental housing market here in Indianola. And so that's attached in the packet, and they are separated between the different groups. Yeah, so if there is any questions about those results, I'd be happy to answer those.
Yeah, and I will say again, when we built the ordinance and the inspection checklist, we did use the survey results as well to help build that. So
That radon level, is that,
That's the EPA's recommendation
is that what
for
it
when
is?
mitigation should occur.
Okay, is it consistent with anything else we do, or is it different than anything else we do?
no, I mean, we don't have any requirements, and even on a building code perspective, we don't require that radon be mitigated because I think the state essentially says you can't require that. And that's on new construction, just to require that the system be put in regardless of results or anything like that. So legal was okay with that being in this ordinance the way we had it written.
And remind me again, what did it come back with? What did
They wanted language that essentially said if the landlord did not want to mitigate the radon, that the tenant would have the option to break the lease. And that was something that legal told us we could not do.
But they weren't in favor of if the tenant asked for a radon test, would they be obliged to do it?
The way that the code is written there, no. The landlord would not necessarily have to agree to, but the tenant can still do a test on their own and come up with that. That was actually some of the discussion we had. I just jump in really quick because, yeah, you can go to Menards and get a lot of these tests and some of them aren't good. So I think the Board of Adjustment even went onto that as, okay, well, at what point do we say this is an actual official test? And at what point is it just maybe a preliminary test?
I'm wondering if it would make more sense, like thinking through, because I do lots and lots of radon tests. A couple of things. I mean, the state requires that all buyers, when it's a real estate transaction, see a radon fact sheet. And it's just acknowledging that they've seen it, that they have the information about radon. But what would it be a possibility in the language that just said that all tenants would have the opportunity to test if it was important to them and decide if they enter into a lease based on those results?
Test before they lease?
Mhm.
Yeah, like before they occupy the property, that they could enter into a, maybe even like, we can enter into a lease, but prior to
Conditional lease?
because a radon test takes 48 hours. If it's from a professional company that can get the reading on the spot, if it's through like a lab thing, you have to mail it in. But some sort of verbiage that gives them the opportunity, but doesn't require the landlord to, it's the break a lease thing.
Well, it
I
would be
I
like
could
a
see it being used
conditional
as a
lease.
tool to get out of a situation. Oh, I got this result.
Preventative before you get in the
But everyone has,
situation.
like, you can get a fact sheet and you have the option to test if it's important to you.
Well, it's a lot different than a final home, right? You have that opportunity to get the thing tested,
Exactly.
and you can decide.
And you can make your
buyer.
decision,
Yeah.
but it's not.
The leases could be
So it would be-
contingent on the
Sure, the lease
results of
would be
that.
contingent upon that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then that way you're not breaking the lease because at the very beginning, the
And they're making an
landlord
informed
is
decision.
agreeing to
Yeah.
that.
Yep,
I like that.
you have the right to request to,
Try that with the legal folks.
yeah.
Yeah, I can run that up the ladder and see what they say, yeah. Yeah, the only thing would be on the conditional lease, and I guess that's where I'm a little bit curious, is do we have the ability to force a conditional lease?
Well,
Well,
why
or
do you
just
need a
say they
conditional
have
lease?
they have the opportunity to
Yeah.
Yeah.
test.
So why do they?
Sure.
Prior to-
Because you don't have to enter into it prior.
48 hours, you're gonna know, and then you say, hold off on the lease till you get the results, but.
Yeah, it's a matter of letting them in to do the test before they actually
Yeah.
have a lease. I think that's where it might get tricky.
Well, so
Devil's
maybe
advocate.
a requirement that they have the opportunity
Sure.
to have that.
Yeah, and the only thing I want to say is, I guess, playing devil's advocate a little bit, the only concern I may have is what happens if a landlord says, no, I'm not going to do that, and then, they're
They
out.
might
and-
choose another
Yeah.
applicant
Yep.
because they
Right.
don't want to do that.
Yep. Yep,
But they might, they make choices based on a lot of different things.
Can you put in here that the person would have that option? In other words, the landlord would have to allow them to do that?
Could you put in that if it tested high during their lease, that the tenant would have the option to negotiate mitigation? No, probably not.
yeah, I'm gonna guess no.
I like your first idea,
Yeah,
Pat.
Yeah,
It's more practical.
It's
Yeah,
letting
yes.
them in.
I'm just thinking if
to
someone's
do the
actually
test.
already
And
there.
that,
Yeah.
and
Oh.
you'd have, I think you'd have to put in here something that would say that the landlord would have to allow them to test. In other words, because then they just say, well, no, you can't come in and test. You either sign a lease or you don't.
Mhm,
You say, no, you gotta let them test.
mhm,
they requested.
mhm.
Yeah.
if they request it, you have to, yeah. And I can ask legal about that too, and then the other thing would be is if anybody's in an existing lease situation, would be before signing or renewing the lease.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
renewal to have that
Yeah, yeah.
opportunity.
Yep.
I think that's great.
Mhm.
And then essentially, I guess that is my question is there any way to say you can't deny a test,
That's what I'm
but you
saying.
could essentially, you can't deny a test, but you could deny mitigation.
Sure.
Sure,
Mhm.
but at least that tenant has the opportunity to either sign the lease or not sign it
Yeah.
based on the results.
Mhm.
It does become a potential material defect that they have to disclose though, right?
You would think so, yeah.
I think in a
Mhm.
blight situation, you have to.
But even, I don't know
What do you think
from the certification process, like, is there an obligation to disclose, like, I know there's mold
Mm.
to the city inspector?
We
Can
could,
someone hide
yeah.
information that's a material defect about the home?
But again, if the only thing we put into the ordinance is that the landlord or the potential tenant has the option to ask for it.
What if the certification can't be renewed unless the mitigation's performed, once that information's known?
And I guess, so one thing we were trying to avoid on that was, and I think it was Iowa City, right, that is actually full on like, no, you're required to do tests, and if it's there, you have to mitigate. I think one thing we were trying to avoid, and just knowing that this was a new program, was to force the test requirement, but it was more of a, if the tenant felt that they wanted a test done, they could do a test, and if it showed that there was radon, then it would have to be mitigated. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess, I think if we're going anywhere where we're saying we're forcing a test and forcing,
It's not forcing a test though, but if the
It's
tenant gets,
forcing-
if the tenant gets one and it's high, during their tenancy, they need to fulfill their lease, right?
Mhm.
Because you can't force them to break the
Mhm.
contract between the two parties.
Mhm.
But before their certification can be renewed, having that be, now that we have this information, that's going to be a condition. Just like if, you know, they had a broken window, they would have to
Mhm.
fix that before they allow someone.
yeah. Yep,
Yeah, so it's almost part of the checklist, right? Something around there.
yeah.
Mhm.
And I think that's just right in that language where it says, you know, if it is known, if the landlord knows that they have high radon, they have to mitigate, but writing it in a way that the city is not forcing you to do a test.
I mean,
Mhm.
because I don't see it like there's going to be, I think it depends on the type of rental and the price point. Like if it's at the tenant's expense, I mean, we're going to see lots that no one ever tests.
Yeah,
And never
exactly.
becomes.
Right.
But if that information does come,
Mhm.
I also kind of question the lock one too.
And just requiring it, or,
Yeah, it'd be
I think so.
hard.
Not that big.
but you question the concern or you question the regulation?
I question it being a regulation.
Okay,
I think that's something that a landlord and tenant can negotiate
yeah,
regardless. They have that option.
Oh, right now, it's not an option.
the way the code's written right now, it's not an option, it is something that's required, but the way the Board of Adjustment had requested to modify it, it would be something that would be required if the tenant requested it.
Mhm.
Which I don't have an issue with.
That you require it if a tenant
Request it.
requests it.
But it's not a common practice from your experience.
No.
People, you just say, I gave you 2 keys, I need 2 keys back, essentially.
And yes, people can get copies of keys.
Right.
But, you know, if someone wants to get into a property, they can get into a property.
Yeah.
Like it, you know, they'll probably just walk in the unlocked front door and then you know what.
Yeah.
So.
Yes.
It just seems like
A pain more than an
It's a,
expense.
yeah, it's a little bit over.
it seems like that's something that could be part of it regardless, and to require it, maybe it's not something that's of value to the tenant.
Mhm.
They're not particularly concerned about it. Maybe that was feedback that you got from the.
Yeah, and that was, well, yeah, it was, but again, I think that was what the Board of Adjustment said too, was, well, if it's not important to the tenant's not gonna ask for it, so then it's not required, but if it is important to the tenant asks for it, then at that point, it becomes a requirement.
If
Yeah,
requested.
I kind of like that approach. So you can
I don't
tell,
see it as a big.
tell the
issue, but I
council
get
we're
that.
firmly split.
Well, the other way to look at it is that the tenant, you know, requested. Is it on the expense of the tenant who wants it done? Would that make any difference? No.
I mean, as long as you don't put, if the tenant requests a new refrigerator, they have to put one in.
I know where you're going now.
It's required.
Speaking from experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have very nice rentals.
I have one small area. It's a section 302.4. It's about grass, weeds, and brush on private property shall be cut, mowed, and maintained so as not to exceed the following height specification.
So really quick, I'll just let you know, that's language that is currently in the code. We're not changing that at all.
So if it's a developed area and you have zinnias that grow 36-inch tall, you can't have them.
First of all, I don't know what zinnias are.
They're flowers.
Flowers. No, I mean, so it's not, to us, that's not a weed. And we've been flexible on a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of people who have gardens and whatnot that,
Okay,
yeah. I
just
mean,
wanted to clarify
yep.
that.
Yep.
Al's got it.
That's a flower.
Well, yeah, we have zinnias along the driveway, so I know how tall they are. They're more than 8 inches.
Specific to weed and brush. and-
Yep. Yeah, more
Okay.
more noxious weeds, I would say.
Generally, I think it's really pretty good. It's as one of the owners, managers said, keep it basic. Well, I think this is pretty basic and it's pretty common sense. Yeah, you got to cover up with switch plates, and you got to have the door on the electrical box, and you got to have a handrail. I mean, it's pretty
General safety.
it's pretty basic.
Yeah.
I was,
In fact, I read all of the comments from the renters and from the owners. And mostly the comments, I think, that the renters made didn't really include, they had other things they were commenting on. Mostly, they didn't comment on this specific proposal. They had other things they were commenting.
Mhm.
And I thought some of those were very enlightening, very direct, very specific. That I learned quite a little bit there. I thought.
surveys
And
are
I
fun.
think some of the owners might want to go back and read them, maybe. I don't know whether they will, but
Included in multiple agendas, so it's a public document now.
yeah, I know it is. And, but no, I think it's pretty basic and pretty straightforward and pretty reasonable. And I'm not sure why, it's change. People like change.
I'll tell you on that point, I don't think we knew exactly what to expect on September 30th when we met the second time, but the fact that really there was only 2 things that came out of that meeting, I honestly thought that was really good. And
Yeah.
that said a lot because it was a group that the first meeting had a lot of questions. We did have a lot of discussion on fees, and I think some people are a little bit concerned with proposed fees, and we haven't included that in anything yet. What I can tell you is what we are doing right now is kind of looking at what the cost of this program is going to be. And we're talking staff time. We have a new staff person that's going to be doing it. All the overhead vehicles, maintenance, cell phones, all of that stuff. And figuring out essentially how we make that back in any fee we do. So actually, Emily and I were just talking about this before the meeting. We're looking at some sort of fee structure that would be like for single family. And then when it comes to duplexes, you'd have a fee of $80 that would cover single family. On duplexes, it would cover the first unit. And then on multifamily, it would essentially include the building plus the first unit. And then after that, it would be $30 for every unit thereafter. So on duplexes, essentially have a $110 fee. On multifamily, if you have 8 units, I'm gonna try to do math in my head real quick, but I think that's $290 is what it would be. So, and again, that's a fee every 2 years, not an annual fee, but an every 2-year fee. So
I was also interested to see that a lot of the renters wanted an annual inspection. Several comments there for annual inspection.
and most of the cities, I don't think we looked at a single city that did annual inspections. It's not a common practice, and yeah, it would take more staff from our end. We've got one full-time person that's really going to be kind of doing all of these inspections, and I think we've got it built up to cover that as long as the inspections don't take hours at a time. But our hope is just with everything being pretty basic that these are 15 to 20-minute inspections once they really get up and going.
I think it's really, we had to get to a certain size to get to this point, but I think it's a really positive thing for the city. Because it's going to just make sure that there's safe dwellings for tenants, and I think it helps with just how the neighborhoods will be overall. I think that's great. It's a lot to undertake though.
Mhm.
I agree with that. At one time, I did some inspections because of my involvement with Habitat for Humanity. And part of the criteria on accepting an applicant was the existing living conditions. I gotta tell you, I saw some ugly stuff in this town. That, yeah, there's no excuse for it.
Mhm.
So my only add was kind of just on the conversation of radon, but more like what if there's mold that's found? The remedy of the mold and then carbon monoxide too, if they have a detection and it does
Mhm.
detect that.
What is our, so what our remedy would be. So I'll cover it holistically in any inspection that we do. So if we do an inspection, we find mold, carbon monoxide, whatever it may be, landlord is going to be given some time typically to take care of this. Now, depending on what the issue is and the seriousness of the issue, it could be as little as, you need it fixed by 5 o'clock today, or you need it fixed by next week.
Okay.
So we don't have anything like that. It says, oh, if it's this long, if it's this long. I think what we're doing with that is really giving some discretion to our code enforcement officer when they're out there, that they see it. And, whatever you think is the appropriate amount of time, you have to give them. So if anything does happen, let's say, I'm just going to give an example of something here, but let's say it's a handrail issue and our code enforcement officer says you need a handrail and you need a handrail in 2 weeks. The code in itself does have relief to where if they have an issue with that or they want a variance to that requirement, they go to the Board of Adjustment. So Board of Adjustment, I think I mentioned that just does serve as the appeal and the variance board to any requirements on there. So, but again, when it comes to something like carbon monoxide, for example, I think that's, get somebody in here and have it taken care of by 5 o'clock. Otherwise, get your tenant in a hotel somewhere. So does that answer your question?
Mhm.
Anything else? Don't need a formal motion or anything like that. We'll kind of take this discussion, summarize it in the memo that we have working, and I think pretty confident we can get this to City Council on Monday to kind of start the review of it as well. So
I assume the council will get the full results of the surveys and the comments from everybody.
yes.
Good.
And they can call Al for a summary.
It's very enlightening.
It is, isn't it? I read every one of them. I read every bit of it. And there was some.
Did you, we'll get a little bit off subject here, but on the comp plan, did you take the time to review all 90 pages of those comments? Because those ones are fun. Very pointed comments.
Any
Impress us
opportunity
if
for
you
public
told us that.
Anytime you have a survey that you can have open comments in, they're always, it's enlightening and sometimes fun to go through them.
Well done, guys.
And again, Emily deserves most of the credit. That was one of the things I had her working on when she started here. And it's funny, it was like first week, I think I said, hey, let's get working on this. And I think within 2 days, she had a code written and drafted. Okay, wait,
Efficient.
slow down. So she did a really good job with it and much appreciated. So we're a small staff, so she's really helped out on this.
All right, the next item on the agenda, 8, is comments. The building permit report, Charlie?
Really quick on the building permit report. I've said this every single month. We're down on single family this year. I think it can be directly attributed to the fact of construction cost. Get to the next one here in a little bit, but as you'll see on the current project list, on the back side of that where we do all our subdivisions, we've got a lot of subdivisions in the queue right now. I would imagine come spring, a lot of these are going to start breaking down, and we'll probably have quite a few lots opening up next year. So hopeful of that. On the valuation, last month I told you we broke our valuation from 2020 already, and we're just going to continue to increase on that as we move along. So I think we're on pace to issue about the same number of permits, if not a little bit more this year, and we're already well ahead of the valuation. So,
How good it is.
yeah. Busy year. So, and then on the current projects, again, just any questions on that, be happy to answer them.
We just drove by that Cab Coffee. When they supposed to.
It's a good question.
They look like
We were
they're
talking about
close.
this morning too. So,
They were putting up the lights finally today. They had the contractor and they're putting up their lights in the
Yeah.
parking lot.
I know we have, every other week, we have a development review meeting with our internal staff and IMU. And the comment that I made this morning was, I think fiber was supposed to get fiber in there and the water meter was supposed to get in there sometime last week and they canceled both of those. So led us to believe they might be just a tad behind where they thought they would be, but I'm sure they're pretty close to getting done. So if they're asking for a water meter and fiber service, it shouldn't be too long.
All right.
Yeah.
Someone like to,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.